Okay, good afternoon. Today is the 5th of January 2011. I'm Darrell Peterson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today we have the honor and privilege of interviewing Lieutenant Colonel retired John Harry Quarton, and he has served in the Canadian military, and we're looking forward to hearing some of the differences between U.S. and Canadian events in World War II. So we'll be talking about a lot of other things also, and nice to have you here, and we call you Harry, I guess.
Yes, right, yep.
And we'll start out by having you state your name and spell your full name. Tell us where and when you were born.
Okay. My name is John Henry Quarton, but I go by Harry Quarton.
Okay.
I was born in Marshall, Saskatchewan, a small little village in Saskatchewan in 1922, and moved to Lloydminster when I was just a tot. My father became the chief of police there and carried that position practically until the day he died. And I joined up from there some years later, of course. So that's where my life began, really.
Okay. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your family heritage?
Yes. Well, my father's on my father's side, he was a British territorial and served in the British Army for nearly 30 years, everywhere from the Gold Coast of Africa. He was in the Boer War, and he was also in the Fourth Battle of Kabul, which was very interesting in this day and age. I have his regimental history, the regimental history of the. He belonged to the Prince of Wales' own regiment, the West Yorkshires, and they served at that time. And I'm not quite sure of the date, but I think it was somewhere around the 1880, late 80s or 1890s at the Battle of Kabul.
And where's Kabul?
In Afghanistan.
Okay.
So we're right back to where we began many
right.
years ago.
Yeah, making a big circle.
So he, after he retired from the Army, after he put in some 20-some years or so, he decided to come to Canada and emigrated to Canada, and where my mother and he homesteaded in the country just outside of Marshall, where I was born.
Okay.
So
the Canada had a Homestead Act, I guess, similar to the U.S.
I think it was very similar. Yeah,
okay.
They chose land and whatever they did, and if it was unbroken land, they got so much money for breaking the land, and so on and so on.
And what year about?
He came out in 1904, right after the Boer War.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess probably the U.S. had started that a little bit earlier.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a lot of the colonies that came out in that particular area was very British. It came under a fellow by the name of Reverend Lloyd, an Anglican minister, and he brought what they call the bar colonists, and they settled in that whole particular area. And even today, you go back and you see all the British influence with all the small villages and so on, and which many are gone now.
Yeah.
But the old schools and churches, particularly, because Lloydminster became the center point, and it was a minster, which is very particular to Britain, where they had the minsters and then the other churches in the countryside around it, and that's how it got started in our particular area anyway.
Okay. Can you locate where you were?
Right
just a relation to some of the bigger towns.
Yeah, Lloydminster is right on the Alberta and Saskatchewan border. about 175 miles east of Edmonton, and about the same distance from Saskatoon. So it's right between the two cities.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
And today it's right in the middle of the oil patch. The oil has been discovered in the last so many years, and now it's instead of agriculture being the main. Well, I guess it's still a very big thing there, but the oil patches, as you know, is much.
so
larger.
this is liquid oil, or is it shale? Or
Yeah,
what?
no, this is liquid oil. These are the drilled wells rather than the oil sands, which is just about 100 miles north. So they're not too, or a couple of 100 miles north, I would think, to the oil sands. So, but I guess that oil stretches all through that area.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up there, took my schooling there, and
Tell us about the schools. Let's see, you were born in
1922.
Okay, so you're starting school about 1930s.
So,
roughly.
yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Okay, I just try to get the timeline
Sure.
right, because things change as
Yeah.
the years go on. So what kind of school was this? Like a one-room?
No, this was a proper our public school, and proper big public school went up to grade 8, and then the high school was from 9 to 12.
Okay, so it must have been a fairly decent-sized town then.
Oh yes, it had a population of about 2,000, I would think,
Okay.
when I was a youngster. Of course, it's quite a large was a city now, of course. But it was and it covered a very large agricultural area, what they call the trading area, and it would cover the population that would be, quite extensive.
Okay, so did you live at home and commute
Yes, I lived
to
at home
school?
until lived at home until as a matter of fact, I quit school to join the Army.
Okay, but how did you get about then? The school was some ways away from your
just
home?
just so many blocks.
Okay.
It was a walkable distance.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
A walkable
All right.
distance to the public school, and the high school ended up was only about 2 or 3 blocks away. So, no problem there.
Well, okay. I was just wondering.
Yeah,
how
no, it wasn't a country
people
school where
that
we
were
had.
further out.
Right.
Did they? Well, let's take that for instance. How did the ones that lived further away,
Well,
say
in those
they're
days,
5 miles
Yeah,
from
well,
town?
they didn't have buses in those days, as
No.
a matter of fact, and so they had a stipulation, I think, where youngsters within I'm not sure if it was about a 4-mile distance that they had to walk,
Oh.
and either way, whether you walk to the big town or to a small country town. And but those kids had to put up with a lot in those early days.
They got a lot of exercise.
Yeah, and in those cold winters and so on,
Oh,
it was quite a thing.
Right.
Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, in my growing up years, I was a chum of mine lived on a dairy farm about 2 miles out of town, and I used a lot of time out there, and sometimes I'd get to stay over and maybe go to school on the Monday morning or so. And we'd ski behind a horse to get to school.
Right, yeah.
But there was lots of stories about those too.
I could imagine. Okay, so there wasn't. Were there country school? The one-room country?
Oh yeah, there was.
schools?
Oh yes, every few miles there was a country school in the covered a certain area, and some were larger. As a matter of fact, my mother, when my father and mother moved out there, my mother taught school at one of the country schools, and until she had her family, and there were 4 boys, so pretty soon she had her hands full. So her teaching days.
And what was her heritage then?
She was born in England, of course, and her family on her side, strangely enough, all her brothers were all Navy. And so I was betwixt and between when I went to join up. I thought I was going to join the Navy first, and when I went off with my chums to Saskatoon to join up in 1939, of course I wasn't near old enough, but anyway, the Navy wasn't recruiting that particular time. They were still getting organized, sort of thing, and so I put it off until spring. And then a bunch of my chums, we all decided we were going to join up, and we went and joined the Army.
Okay.
So started my Army career when I was 17.
So you graduated from high school?
No, I didn't.
No?
I never finished school.
Oh, wow.
That's another. I finished school many years later.
Yeah.
Correspondence,
Mm-hmm.
and because I rose in rank, but I couldn't. I didn't have a commission, and the only way I could get a commission, of course, was with a proper educational
Yeah.
thing. So I took my educational courses and so on, and passed my grade 11 exams to get my commission.
Okay.
So.
So, do you remember the December 7th, 41?
I remember it well.
What was the reaction
Well,
in
as a matter of
Canada?
fact, at that time we were stationed in a place called DeBert, Nova Scotia, and that was the last dropping off place, training area that Canadians went through before we went overseas.
Mhm.
And we'd been in DeBert for a number of months. Matter of fact, we had not too long before that received our first tanks. All our tank training had been done at the Armored Corps schools in Camp Borden, and now we were on our own at DeBert. We got our first tanks. They were Ram tanks, with no guns on them. But the gunnery, the chaps who were taking gunnery had to take that on special guns that they had set up in the training centers and so on.
Mhm.
But our first tanks, and when the balloon went up in Pearl Harbor, 7th of December, and I remember it well. And when the order came out, we were put on standby, 24-hour standby immediately, and that lasted for a few days until they figured out what was happening and so on. And then,
Mhm.
of course, we were stood down.
So, what did the Canadian government do? Did they declare war?
Canada declared war on the 9th of September 1939.
Okay, this
Yeah.
was during the Battle of Britain.
That's before the Battle of Britain.
Before,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
The British, I think, declared war on the 7th of September. We declared war on the 9th of September. And
But that was against Germany.
That's right. Yes.
Japan was.
Well, then that's right. Well, then they immediately declared war on Japan, following the United States. And,
Okay.
and so everything went into action on the West Coast and all that sort of thing. All the defenses and so on were then put in place on like Vancouver Island and places like that.
Yeah.
And some of those old bits of forts are still there today. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, heavy cement.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Lasts a long time.
Yeah. So then from there, we shipped out of we were only 100 miles from Halifax. So we shipped over from Halifax in the early part of 1942. As a matter of fact, we were on the water the same time as the DR.DAVE was taking place on France.
Mm.
And anyway, we landed in Scotland and then moved on down into England, and we trained there for nearly 2 years at one place or another, and then all the specialty courses, every kind of classification that you could think of was taking place in England, because England was well set up with training centers.
Yeah.
And of course the Canadians took advantage of all those kind of things, that rather than setting up their own.
Okay, but they kind of remained as separate
We stayed.
commands. I guess.
Absolutely.
There was no integration of commands between.
No.
Okay.
We stayed under our own command, but we were in different areas that we got under the command of a British general or so on, because of that area.
Mm-hmm.
Like Field Marshal Montgomery, he actually was in the general in charge of the southern part of England before the invasion, or before he went to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, he had really nothing to do with the Canadians. They went on with their own training and things like that.
Okay.
And then, of course, we had the two divisions down in Italy, the 1st Infantry Division and the 5th Armored Division, that we sent to Italy. We fought all the way through. And we then got into the invasion training, of course, with landing craft and all those sorts of things, getting ready for the big D-Day event,
Mm-hmm.
which we had no idea whatsoever when that was going to take place. And I must say, it was one of best handled piece of secrecy I think that I can remember.
Yeah.
Wherever you went around Britain, of course, you saw all kinds of buildup of troops and vehicles and ammunition. Like you go down a country road and these great big trees that would canopy over the roads. The ammunition was stored all the way along underneath these trees. So it was a well planned out affair until we got the word to waterproof our vehicles, and then of course once we got that word, we knew that the day was coming pretty quick.
So what was your specialty at this point?
Well, I was in the Armored Corps. Our regiment was an armored reconnaissance regiment, and my side was on the ended up on the technical side. I became the technical quartermaster, and so then I was seconded to the division headquarters for our general's staff, and I looked after the resupply of all tanks and ammunition and petrol to our fighting troops. So that was
quite a job.
Yeah, it was quite a job.
You don't want to run out of gas.
No, that's for sure.
Heat of battle.
Yeah. And then we finished our training before the invasion, and as I said, we waterproofed all our vehicles, and then when the event went on, we went, and there again, how they kept those things so secret, because you could go into pubs and things like that in the evening, but you wouldn't hear a word. You wouldn't hear a word about anything.
Well, all the German spies had been caught by that time,
well,
I guess.
Yes, and it was.
And their reconnaissance photographs weren't.
Sure.
Weren't
and
showing
of course,
it
some of the camouflage stuff that they pulled off. They had rubber tanks and they had rubber trucks.
Airplanes. I've seen pictures of blow-up airplanes.
Yeah, and the thing you'd see these things in the edge of the trees, to make them think that was a big harbor, and all it was imitation trucks and things like this, and so on. And I guess it fooled them, and even to the point where they used General Patton as the guy that was going to invade Dover, and had his army over on the one side of England there, and they had all these dummies all set up, and the Germans bought it. They thought the attack was coming over there. And,
that was a kind of a critical thing, if I
it was.
remember right.
Yeah,
that
it was.
Hitler hesitated because he thought the invasion starting there was not the real one, and that there was something. The big invasion was going someplace else besides.
Well, on trips over, like I go overseas just about every year. I'm the president of my regimental association and have been for 20 years. And we go over pretty well every year, tours, and of course we've got to know a tremendous amount of people over there, from France right through to Germany. And you hear some of the stories. Now they're getting few and far between, because the older folks are going just like our troops are. But you hear some of the stories that they told about when the invasion really happened, and the reaction of the Germans and things like that. Particularly when they saw the ships coming, landing craft and so on, and then of course when they saw these tanks come out of the water, particularly the dual drive tanks, there they are. Here is something floating in the water with a big gun on it. They didn't know what they were facing. So there were many stories that the civilians over there would tell about those things. Yes, and that was another thing, how organizations worked. When we were going over, you went over on different ships and then onto different landing crafts, and you thought everything was so well organized that you'd have a piece of everything on every boat. But gosh, on my particular landing, or on our Liberty ship that we went over to the beaches before we got onto the landing craft, I looked around. I had no officers. And I thought, well, this is a real hiccup. But it wasn't. When we got onto the landing craft itself, and then the same thing happened on the other ships alongside us, and of course we hit the beaches or the armored. Of course, the infantry and that have cleared the beaches. We didn't have to do
What day did you
We didn't
go?
get over until day 14 or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because they couldn't take the tanks. They had
Yeah.
didn't have the room for it then.
All right.
But by that time, we could move in, even though they had the balloons above us and everything else to try to keep the fighters off and things like that.
Mhm.
And as soon as we got in a mile, we stopped to whip all the waterproofing off. Because you couldn't go very far with that waterproofing on, or
What was that
well,
like?
the
I don't know
waterproofing
about
stuff
it.
was all breathing apparatus that
Oh.
you put on to hook up to your exhausts and so on,
Okay.
so you could go up to 6 or 8 feet of water without killing your motor. The
Okay.
motor could be underwater, but as long as the air intake and the air out had to happen, of course.
All right.
And but you couldn't have that on there for very long, or the vehicles would overheat. So
Okay.
as soon as you got up on off the beaches and onto some level land, you stop long enough for everybody to get off and just rip all the junk off,
Okay.
and then keep going.
Hmm.
And but it was amazing. You had your map reference, and people were coming from all directions. And at nighttime, by the time you got your guards and pickets and stuff out and so on, in the morning, everybody was there. Everybody was there.
Right.
Yeah, it was just amazing. Yeah, and then the thing started. Of
Was
course,
it the Canadians went. What beach did they?
we went in on Juno. That was
Juno,
That was
okay.
the Canadian beach.
Yeah.
It was between the two British beaches. Gold was on our right. Let's see, Sword was on our left, and then Omaha and Utah beyond that.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did very well in those first while. We got in quite a ways until the Carpet Cay Airport was one of the big strong points that we had to take just out of Con, which really was a real tough thing to take, and it took days to. The first few days we got further inland than anybody, but then we couldn't get any further. And because what they did, they were, and of course we didn't know this as regular troops. You're not informed of all what's going on the whole front. And of course the idea was to make as much a show on our front, so as General Patton and General Bradley and the two armies could move around through the Cherbourg and come up the other side, and come in encircling movement. And of course, we put these Panzer divisions in front of us, which really held us up until the big push came in what was that, in August, when we pushed down and the Americans came from behind, and we got actually met up at a place called Ormel, a place called Mount Ormel. Actually, Mount Ormel was our Polish division, and it was very high ground, and you could see for miles from there. But the Germans were very well dug in around there, and as a matter of fact, the Poles got encircled, and we're in real deep trouble. And as we were pushing down towards to meet the Americans at Trun, our commander had to take most of our squadrons, most of our armored brigade away to go and help the Poles, because they were being surrounded. And consequently, we were slower in getting the gap closed than we should have been. We would have met the Americans on about August the 14th or something like that, if it had all gone according to plan. But it didn't, and I don't think we met until about August the either 18th or 20th or something like that. And actually, it was the Poles who actually made the first contact with the Americans, and we were in between. So, but we closed the pocket where we had two German armies now encircled, but there was only one, and we held the only spot that they could escape from. And of course, by this time we were with our other brigade, part of the brigade over at Mount Ormel, we were down in strength, and we had one squadron and a company of infantry trying to keep the bridge at St. Lambert's or Dives, and that was about the only escape route that the Germans had, and they used every tactic you could think of to try to get across that little river. They gave up most of their vehicles. They were all coming out practically on foot, and they kept to the edge of the river until they trying to get across our bridge, and that's where Major Curry was. And fortunately, he held it, and for 72 hours, I think, without any help or anything else. And as a matter of fact, he was awarded the Victoria Cross for that action. But if we'd had more strength there, we would have captured a heck of a lot more Germans than what we did. But I think in all, with the Americans, the Canadians, and the Poles, I think captured somewhere in the neighborhood of about 200,000 Germans. So,
my.
yeah. But
And how did you get the logistics of handling them too?
Oh yes, and of course that was one of the biggest bugbears of the whole thing. We weren't prepared for anything like that at all, and so to be sending prisoners back down the line, that meant you had to give up so many men, vehicles to transport them, and all this sort of thing. So which really,
where did they go?
Well, they
to?
took them just back a few miles actually, and set up cages, and where they were processed and that sort of thing. And then they were good many of them they shipped over to England, of course, after they had gone through the processing and all that sort of stuff. But it was a pain in the neck.
So,
you know,
how did the logistics go from you to somebody that can get you supplies, and how did they arrive?
Well,
that's something we never hear too much about.
Well, as a matter of fact, it brings up a good point. When we were on the Liberty ships coming out of the Liberty ships came out of the Thames estuary, and most of the big other landing craft, the infantry landing craft, came out of the south of England because they only had a few miles to go across. Yeah. And so the big Liberty ships that had all the tanks and things like that on them, we went way down. So we would be at sea, and I'll never forget, I saw these great big huge spools in the water, and they must have been 200 feet high at least, I would think. And they were being towed by tugboats, and then we were told what they were, and they had the plastic pipe on them, and as they were going along, they were laying a plastic pipe, unrolling all the way across the channel.
That right? I never heard that.
Oh, and that's how the gasoline got to France.
So they had a 20-some mile pipeline.
That's right, and that came out at the other end, and where I think it was handled by the Army Service Corps. They had these portable canneries where the petrol came in one end, and sheets of little tin about so big went in one end, and the gasoline went in, and out came 4-gallon cans of gasoline at the other end.
Oh.
and it was a fantastic thing. And of course we had to have so then we started to be able to get our gasoline on our trucks, and then drive it up to the units and so on. But as you realize, the further and further away, the harder and harder it got to bring our goods up.
Yeah.
Fortunately, with the pipeline, they were able to move it, but then other stuff, food and ammunition and all that sort of thing.
How did the food?
Well, that all came over on ships, and that's when they built and that was the other thing that we saw, but we didn't know what they were. Was the Tilbury docks, and the Tilbury docks were huge cement and steel structures. It was one of Churchill's ideas. I recall reading the story about it. He was on some trip or other, and with one of his engineers, and he told him, he said, after the Dieppe raid, of course, back in 1942, was for one purpose only, and that was to find a port that they could capture right off in an invasion, so they'd have a place to bring in the supplies and so on. Well, as you know the story of Dieppe, the brigade got broken up. They went in 2 different sections, and I've walked it by foot, and the port itself is about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile inland, nicely covered through a channel. And so when they hit the beaches, they had part of their force go one way and part the other, and they put in tanks, and they had the Churchills, and of course their intelligence was lacking in those days, and they didn't discover it until they hit the beaches. But the beaches were all made up of stone, of rock, rounded from the centuries of wear.
Yeah.
And the tank tracks could not get any traction.
Oh,
and all they did was
with stones.
they just dug themselves in, and they were sitting ducks. And Dieppe is a very high cliffs on both sides of the beaches, and they had covering fire down on them, so they just gave them what for, and took out all their tanks. And the attack was run by a fellow by the name of Colonel Merritt. He just died about 4 years ago in Vancouver. He got the Victoria Cross. But he went in, and he got through on the side of the channel that he wanted to get through, but the others, Toronto Scottish and some other regiment, didn't get through. So instead of going all the way in and all being captured, he pulled back and got a good many of his men out, but he stayed behind and was captured. And but from that, they learned that they had to capture, they had to have a port. And so after the Dieppe raid was over, Churchill said to these engineers, "Build me a port." So they built these things, and they built in all parts of England, and they towed them over, and then they hooked them together. And those things came out in the water, about a good quarter of a mile out in deep water, so the big ships could come in. And then it was in a kind of a horseshoe. So the trucks could come from shore and come on there, and the boats, ships would pull alongside, and they'd unload them just like they would in any port, and loaded them onto the trucks, and away they went and had this thing going like that. So they had that going for, I don't know, I guess it was somewhere in the month of July, or somewhere in there, maybe the end of June, and a big storm came up and wrecked it. So they saved part of it by sinking some Liberty ships as a breakwater to protect them. So that helped the supply on our front, on the American front, to keep us going for a ways. But then the further away you got, the more crucial it was to have a proper port. And of course, the Americans were using Cherbourg, which was, they had a safe port, but it was so far away. And so then, of course, the big thing was to take Antwerp, and because that was the biggest port in Europe, and that became one of our jobs. The Canadian Army had we were allotted the coastal areas. We cleared the coastal ports and towns and so on, and some inland too, but mostly anyway, after Antwerp. But the thing was with Antwerp is a port that's a long way inland. There's a lot of islands and things like that leading into it, and the boats and the Germans had control of all that. And so then that meant having to take those areas as well. By this time, I just read it the other day, the Americans were now 400 miles from their supply line, and we were 300 miles from our supply line. So show you how
ways
important
to move everything.
Yeah, how important Antwerp became. So anyway, I think Antwerp was taken. It was either around October. It was well on anyway before we took Antwerp, and then could move on into the rest of Belgium and Holland. We went to clear those islands in Walcheren Island and some of those places, and of course the Germans opened up all the dikes and flooded a lot of the lowlands, and so it was pretty tough slugging. Most of that was done by the infantry. Thank goodness we didn't get in too many of the real wet spots, but yeah, that was a bad time. Yeah, and then we went on from there to, then came wintertime more or less, into November. We were well into Holland, and then of course the Rhine attack, of course,
Bastogne.
Yeah, no, even before Bastogne, this was getting across the Rhine River when the big airdrop took place, and of course, and the bridge too far episode. We were on the ground at a place called Sertogenbosch, about I guess 100 kilometers down the line, because Nijmegen came in there, and we had to clear one part of Germany that comes across on this side, a place called Udom. So we had to take that area. So that was that was winter, and it was terrible. Mud and mud and mud. Terrible for tanks, I tell you.
Getting the trucks of supplies, I suppose they were getting.
Yeah, and then of course there was the Battle of Bastogne and the Bulge. By that time we were at a place called Sertogenbosch and Wut, and the Moss ran right along. That was the dividing line, as a matter of fact, between us and the Germans, and we were keeping a smoke screen going along there for most of the time, because they were moving vehicles, because the Moss made a turn and went up like that, so this was our territory and that was German territory. So we could go quite a ways without being bothered with them, except we didn't want them to see what we're doing, and Montgomery was trying to build up as much stuff as he possibly could to get across the Rhine, and so that was a thing. And when the Germans broke through across they came from two directions. They came across our front over the river, Moss, and then the other way through the Ardennes, and so we were taken from here, and we had to paint our tanks white overnight and head down to try to help the Americans. But we never got into that battle. We got there, but by that time the Americans had taken control of the situation. So then we went back to our own area, getting ready for the big push across the Rhine, and once that was done, and that was a scary thing, going across the floating bridge. You wonder if those things are going to hold up and all the rest of it, but they did. And then from then on, really, it was a chase, a real chase. But some bad spots. I think the worst spot we ever saw was that thing at the big battle in south of Caen at the Battle of Falaise, and we called it the Dead Horse Gulch. The Germans still were using a tremendous amount of horses and stuff for transport, and it was the most ugly looking thing you ever saw in your life. Between the Army and the Air Force, there wasn't much left of any of them, horses or men. It was terrible. Anyway, we ended up at the end of the war. We ended up between Oldenburg and Wilhelmshaven, just about up on the North Sea there, and so we stayed there for a little while. Actually, our big job there was bringing the Germans back into Germany, captured, for bringing them back for their own demob, and we did that for a number of weeks before they moved us back to Holland, and we stayed there. Well, I stayed there right until the very end, because I was single, and my rank. I got nailed. We were called the Frozen Few, and we stayed behind to take the equipment away from the other regiments.
So you were a lieutenant colonel by now?
No, I wasn't. No, I was still a sergeant major. I was a top sergeant major.
Okay.
And I hadn't got my commission yet, and we took all the vehicles and all their equipment away, and then the troops would head for the repat depots and then when it came. And then they closed those up one after the other until we got down to the Hook of Holland was the last one that was, and we were the last ones out. I had about 30 or 40 men, I guess, and heavens, we had nothing. We didn't even have firewood for the fireplaces. The guys were breaking up the camp. As a matter of fact, they take the beds and they were all wooden slats, And this, I would never forget this Dutch major calling me to the office one night. And it was cold. It was in February 1946, and snow on the ground, and they said, "Your men are breaking up the camp. They're ruining things." And I said, "Well, have you got any coke or coal for the fireplace?" "No, we don't have any." I said, "Well, good night, sir." and they kept going. So eventually a boat came, and we got on it and got back to England. And then, of course, we sat around there for weeks waiting for boats, because big thing, the invasion was a big thing, but it was a big thing to get the troops home after the war was over.
Everybody left or
Everybody
wanted to leave at
that's
once.
right. And so we were the last ones out of there. Yeah. As a matter of fact, when I got home, my regiment was already holding their first reunion in Edmonton.
They really?
When I got off the train.
Yeah.
And I went right to the hotel with a kit bag and checked in, and they didn't even have any room in the hotel for me. But one of my old captains came along, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll come and stay with us overnight." So we got into the reunion, and I was the only one who was still in uniform. Everybody else had already been discharged and everything else.
Shed those clothes.
Oh man, what a time! Yeah, but then I was down getting my discharge a month later in Calgary, and I ran into my old 2IC, and so he said, "Oh, we got a big meeting in Edmonton next week. We're starting a new regiment." And I said, "Come on, I'm just getting out." And he said, "You be there." And so anyway, I was there, and so were a good many of the regiment. And we started a new militia regiment, or reinstated an old one, actually, is what it was, a 19th Alberta Dragoons, an old cavalry regiment. And
So were you out of the military?
Yeah, I went out of the regular and into the reserves.
Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't have any lapse of time at all.
Yeah.
So started there again, and then I got my commission, and went ahead from there. And I stayed in for I did 6 years on the regular, and then I did 40 years in the reserves.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah.
You really
So
did.
yeah. So I ended up. I commanded 2 different regiments over my time, and.
But how does the reserve work there? Is it
All volunteer,
just,
of course.
But is it a part-time thing?
Oh, yes.
Like
Oh, yeah.
our National Guard?
That's right. Yeah.
So you had another occupation?
Oh yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was in the newspaper business, and well, I had apprenticed as in there before I'd gone overseas, and so I worked for the Edmonton Journal, one of the big newspapers in Canada, still today, and stayed there for 7 years, but decided it wasn't my forte. So then I went out in sales, and I went into well, first of all, I was selling school and hospital supplies to begin with, and then I got hooked up with through my Army life. I went on to become a captain, then a major, and then I was appointed the aide-de-camp to the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta, and that's the Queen's representative. Each province has a representative of the Queen, and I became the senior aide, and I served 5 lieutenant governors in 22 years.
Wow.
And consequently, that opened a lot of doors, and so I got to know a lot of the diplomats and diplomatic corps, and we formed a company which I ran, international trade. It was called Can Trade International, and we ran trade shows all around the world.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I did that.
That kept you busy. Huh?
Yeah, I stayed at that practically right to the time I packed it in. It was great because that opened a lot of doors, and I because of that I was involved in every royal visit in Alberta for about 30 years, I guess, or something like that.
So you met the Queen?
Oh, I
know the Queen personally?
I aided the Queen, Prince Philip, and as a matter of fact, Princess Diane, we had her 21st birthday when she was in Edmonton.
Wow.
And I aided the old Queen Mother. She was a great gal. And there was I could tell you some stories about that.
Well, we'd be glad to hear.
Having the Lieutenant Governor was a lady. Helen Hunley was the Lieutenant Governor, and she said, "Well, what can we do about?" No, it wasn't a lady. No, it was Franklin Staunton. What can we do for we had a state dinner the night before, which was put on politically with the Prime Minister or the Premier, all that sort of thing. So we wanted something more or less informal. And I said, well, why don't you have something with the young people? And the Queen Mum loved Girl Guides and Boy Scouts and things
Oh,
like
really?
that.
Okay.
So she said, okay, go ahead. So I arranged it, and then she had a lot of OUs out there from people. So I went after people with their sons and daughters that were in cadets and 4-H clubs and Girl Guides, Boy Scouts, and we had put on a big luncheon at Government House, and all these kids, they were all, I guess, from 12 to 15 or 16, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the Queen Mum just had a great time with them. And of course, we tried to keep things on a schedule. And I had her lady in waiting and her a couple of other her staff, and we had set up a luncheon place out in the patio for us to have lunch while they were eating inside. And every now and again, I poke my head in and get hold of the maitre d', and I said, "How are we doing?" And he said, "Oh, we're losing time." He said, "That young fellow there beside the Queen won't finish his soup course, and I can't take anything away from anybody else until he's finished." So I said, "Well, you just stand behind him. Next time he puts his spoon down, just grab his plate." So he did, and we're looking at a schedule because we only have the Queen at a certain time. We have to. She has to be out of there onto a plane, and so anyway, the next time I went in, he hadn't finished his main course, and I said, "Well, do the same thing. Just grab his plate." And that was it. And we got the thing finished.
Was he too busy talking?
Oh, he was too busy talking to the Queen.
Oh,
and,
well,
and then one time I came in, and I was
might not get another chance.
Yeah, and I came into the dining room, and I leaned over to speak to the governor, and the Queen saw she was at the other end of the table, and she said, "What is it, Colonel? Are you worried about the time?" And I said, "Yes, I am, ma'am." And she said, "Well, I'm not." So it didn't matter. The planes are held up all over the place because no plane can take off as long as theirs are in the area. But anyway, it was funny. But that kid went away from there hungry, I'm sure.
Well, but he had a lot of memories.
I'll say. Oh yeah, there was
talking about the rest of his life.
incidents like that made it well worthwhile, you know. And some of them were great people. I had Princess Margaret. Oh, that was just in the last few years before I retired. And Princess Margaret she had her problems, I guess.
Oh.
She was a very nice lady.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a big function on at Government House and down at the Parliament buildings. And we were going on down to some big garden party. And so I'm escorting her, and she says, Colonel, she says, "Well, just poke me in the ribs and tell me what to do." Oh yeah, she was just a great. As a matter of fact, of all the royals that I had aided over my years, she was about the easiest to handle. You know, handle. It's probably not the right word, but look after. She was a very nice lady. Well, most of them all were really. I don't know how they put up with that kind of a schedule that they do, but Jan had, and then of course we had in those days we had the Churchill Society. Well, as a matter of fact, we still do. The Churchill Society. We formed a Churchill Society back in, oh dear, I can't remember the years. It was when Churchill was still alive. We were the only Churchill Society that was formed before he died, and we had his blessing for the thing.
And what was their purpose then?
The purpose of it was for high school debates about Churchill and his life.
Oh,
and
really?
they had high school debate, and then on the last, they had the competition, and then we'd have the winners at this Churchill dinner. And it was a very expensive dinner to go. But we had a speaker come from England, and the speaker had to have someone who had either served on Churchill's staff or a very close relationship.
Okay.
Either one of the generals, like General Mark, we had General Mark Clark one year, Field Marshal Montgomery, Field Marshal Alexander, Lord Hailsham, all these people that had been very close to him during the war.
And the members, though, were they school?
No, the members were people like yourselves. Anybody in town wanted to join the society
so
and put up a few $100 to belong to it.
I don't know of anything equivalent to that.
No,
Where they actually debated each other as adults.
Yep.
With normally we think of as a school.
Well, it was
activity.
the competition between the high schools around the province, and then we'd have the meet off, and then those kids that won would be presented at the Churchill dinner to the speaker
Okay.
and given the Churchill Award and so on. And it still goes on to this day. And as a matter of fact, I hadn't been to one I've been retired over 20 years. Anyway, this year it was their 60, I forget what anniversary it was. No, 40 some anniversary. So they said, you've got to come this year, Harry. So my wife and I made a special effort and flew over to Edmonton for it. And it was just a fantastic thing, and it still goes on to this day.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a real good way of establishing, history.
Well, that's
and
right. It keeps that at the forefront.
Yeah. The heritage as well as civics, I guess.
All the good parts and bad parts that they said about Churchill, and of course one of his favorite stories, of course, was on himself. Was when he was a younger man. I think he was in the army, probably the First World War, and it was I guess he was on leave in London or something or other, and he was at some dinner party or something, and he went up to Lady Astor and says, "You know, Lady Astor, you are ugly." And she says, "Young man, you are drunk." And he says, "Yes, madam, but in the morning I'm going to be sober and you'll still be ugly." Now, whether that is a true one or somebody made that up on him, but they attribute that to Churchill.
Well, we'll never know.
That's right.
Well, that's quite an honor to be able to
and so,
rub elbows with
and
royalty.
And then since I've been retired, I spent all those 20 years, and now we're looking after the regiment again. I've been the president now for 20 years, and we go overseas every year.
Wow.
And we've laid 16. We did the last one last year. 16 bronze plaques from the beaches all the way through to Germany. And
marking
our where we lost men mostly, and different cemeteries, and some of those are city halls and places like that. And then this last one was on a DD tank on Juno Beach that the French pulled out of the ocean. And
still something left.
Yeah, and it's now in their main city square. And we now have all our regimental badges on it. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And and we have one big monument in Germany, in the city of Udom, where we lost more men and tanks in that particular battle. That was the Battle of the Hochwald. We lost more men and tanks there than anywhere else. Yeah, it was terrible. It was in the wintertime. Mud up to our ears, and
Oh, that's I guess that's a big difference in what the Americans do. I don't know. Maybe they do, have reunions in Europe. I know they have a lot of reunions in the U.S. But
well, we hold a reunion.
I guess we're not plaque.
No,
people.
No, maybe not. Well, no, the Brits were always that way. You go through Britain,
you go
to the churches and things like
right.
that. Colors are hanging and so on.
It's a significant part of the culture.
That's right.
And
most of our Canadian regiments are affiliated with the British regiment.
Okay.
Yeah, we're affiliated with a British regiment and have been for a century,
Yeah.
And so they have that kind of a connection as well. We have a reunion every year, but I try to hold it in a different city in every year. Like this year, it's going to be we have it in June in Edmonton, and we've been to Vancouver, we've been to Penticton, we've been to Niagara Falls, we've been to Ottawa, Halifax.
Well, it's a good chance to see the country.
Well, that and our men are spread all over, because they're not like when we joined up as in one town. But then when the reinforcement time came, they came from all over the countryside. And then too, with their jobs after the war, guys ended up here and there and everywhere.
Yeah.
So,
well, I gotta change tapes here, but we can just take a moment to pause here and see if I can come on. Maybe I just shut this off, I guess, before it'll give up. Okay. These things. They all have their little idiosyncrasies. Now we're back in business here. Okay.
And we had the I had the honor a few years ago. When we were in Ottawa, contacted the Speaker of the House, and he invited us to come into the House, and we were up in what they call the Speaker's Gallery, and then he introduced us to the whole House of Commons, and we're the only Western regiment that's ever been into the House of Commons.
Oh my!
And so we had the next day we had a big parade at the National War Memorial in Ottawa, and where we did our thing with the wreath laying and so on.
So do you have representatives from all? How many of these are there in Canada? I guess.
Which the
organization like yours,
regiments?
or do you represent the whole country?
No, I just represent our regiment, South Alberta Regiment.
Okay.
Well, I don't know how many there are now, but I belong to another organization called the NCBA, which we deal with the government, National Council of Veterans Associations, and there's 58 associations in that association.
All right.
And that's an association that we deal with the Minister of Veterans Affairs and things like that. But we just have now the new Charter of Rights for Veterans, which spells out all the entitlements, not only for veterans of the Second World War, but particularly now with the Afghan and so on, where things are quite different as far as the veterans and pensions are concerned, with the amount of horrific injuries that the guys are suffering over there, rather than our death toll is not
casualties, but they're
everything
wounds.
from mental and everything
Yeah.
else that we didn't suffer to the same extent at all that these fellows do. So we carry a pretty big stick when it comes to getting our points across, and fortunately we've had good ministers who have been very understanding and got most of these changes through the House of Commons, which are now law, and so the pensions and that sort of thing have been fairly well looked after as far as veterans are concerned. As a matter of fact, most of my work now with our association is looking after veterans' complaints and things with the department and so on. And
so you have veterans not only from World War II, but
that's right.
All times.
Right. Well, our regiment is still involved in Afghanistan, and of course we've got quite a number of those. Fortunately, we've had very few casualties in our regiment, but it's taken a lot of funding and things like that to look after families at home and so on, to make sure that these young, because a lot of them are young and married young, and so a lot of these kids that have gone over have now got families. Whereas in the Second World War, we had a lot of guys like myself that weren't married, and of course they didn't have those problems when they came home.
Yeah,
but that's a different story. So
taking care of the home fronts.
That's right. So we spend a lot of time on that sort of thing, and as a matter of fact, I have on the picture shows I got an award from the minister here just 2 years ago. It's called the Minister's Commendation for working with the Veterans Affairs and so on. And that medal I just got on that picture there was for the 20 years that I spent looking after the regiment, more or less. And,
okay. Well, we'll scan those pictures and include them.
And then 3 years ago, I was honored by the President of France. He presented me with the French Legion of Honor.
Oh my God!
And so you you spend a lot of time doing things, and think you're not getting anywhere with some of these things, but really, some of it has really helped
Yeah.
down the line, you know.
Right. Right.
And, yeah.
So, let's see. What I was going to ask something here. Oh, well, what kind of, when you were working your job before retirement, setting up these
the trade shows.
trade shows, was that for any particular part of industry,
Yes,
or was it for every kind?
Well, we had two, actually. We had a general industry, which we would show all kinds of industrial products and commercial and stuff that would even, like wine from Chile and Germany and things like that. Besides shoe manufacturing from Brazil, and then the other show was the oil show. We put on a big oil show, which was called Intercan, and it was strictly on oil equipment and so on, which was very, very big. Yeah, and it was, and we, I covered all of South America, all North America, and the Western Europe, and at the end, I didn't put it on, but I did all the work for it for about 3 years, putting on the Russian show.
Oh,
yeah. But I didn't actually put it on myself. It was, but anyway, but it was great because.
Well, that sounds like a lot of headaches to take care of.
But
little details that have to be ironed out. So did you have a staff too then?
Oh yes, yeah. We worked, our main staff. We worked out of Edmonton, and then we had the Edmonton Exhibition Association. Of course, we used to use the old Edmonton Gardens, which was the arena for a lot of the shows in Canada, until we got them convinced that they should build some trade show buildings, and they built some buildings for us in Edmonton, which were absolutely fantastic. And now they've just gone through about $170 million refurbishing with new buildings and so on. Now the largest trade show buildings in all of Canada, I think. All started from our little two-bit outfit.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
So how about the language barriers? Did you have a bunch of people that spoke different languages?
Yes. Yeah, we did, because we did our brochures and stuff. We did in 7 languages. Yeah. And but strangely enough, in the trade end, when you're dealing with different countries, you're dealing with most people that have a section that is strictly English speaking. Like the trade, most of the trade commissioners, if they don't themselves, a good portion of their staffs do. So it didn't matter whether you were dealing with I guess maybe the toughest one of all was the Chinese. And we had a terrible time getting along with them. As a matter of fact, what we ended up doing was going into Chinatown in Edmonton and getting some of the more prominent merchants to come and give us a hand. And but that was the only way we could get along with them, because they had a few interpreters, but their interpreters were totally useless to us.
Well, they were taught English in China. They didn't pick up all these little nuances that we have.
We had some great experiences, I'll tell you. Well, one of the when arranging the Russian show, we had
what years was
that would
this?
Be about
before?
1988.
Before the breakup.
And a whole bunch of Russian engineers where the heck were they? Anyway, we had convinced them to come from Vladivostok and come down to Edmonton to a big event, and that's when we made the big proposal to get them to do the show and so on. And you think you're fooling some of these people, and of course I was doing the emceeing and all that sort of thing and doing all the arranging, and we had the Minister of Economic Development from the provincial government, another one from the federal government, and the general manager of the Exhibition Association, and besides our president of the trade show company. And anyway, we were making presentations. I had things, plaques made up, one thing and another, that some from the government and some from our organization.
Mm-hmm.
And after it was all over, this commissar gets up there and he's starting to reply to all these presentations and so on. And so he's making all these presentations, and then he calls me up and he says, I know who does all the work around here. And he presented me with a beautifully hand-engraved vodka glass
Oh,
for
my.
pouring,
Yeah.
beautifully done.
Mm.
But you think you're fooling some of these. Oh, Kerry, you didn't fool this old Russian at all.
No, the Russians they're pretty smart.
Yeah,
They're,
and one of the things they wanted, and which we gave, or what? No, they did. Well, we did put it as a surprise. We took them to a hockey game, and of course they wanted to see Gretzky.
oh.
And so we had all the hockey signed. All the hockey sticks were signed with all the team, Messier, Gretzky, the whole kit. We loved them. Well, you could have sold them anything at that stage.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, they appreciate it, but they do a good job of entertaining. Well,
Oh, yeah.
If you're in Russia,
That's-
business-wise,
Yeah.
Of course, you got to learn how to
Oh yeah.
handle the vodka.
Yeah, that's right.
Inevitable part of
Yes.
any
Yeah.
transaction or meeting is the
Yeah, but
toasting.
it's the same wherever you go. I think, in all our trips to Europe, we had Prince Bernhard from the Netherlands, and he was at the Canadian Army headquarters where I met him towards the end of the war. And but his friend, his real friend, was our general. Just a minute. Shoot. Blanked out.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. One of those senior moments. Oh, goodness gracious. They were very, very good friends right to the very end. And anyway, over the years, the general, after he had retired, he became a very good friend of us because he thought our regiment was the best armored regiment in the whole Canadian Army. And so he always had us up on a little pedestal. So we always invited him to our reunions and things like that. And even when we wrote our wartime history, I had him do the preface to the book and so on. And anyway, through him, I got to know Prince Bernhard much better. And when the general couldn't come over, he'd say, "Well, okay, you make sure you go and see the prince." So that happened a couple of times. Well, then the prince, he took hold of it from there on. So every time we went over with a tour with our veterans and their families, we had to, the last day we ended up at the palace.
Oh, my.
And he put on a reception
Special.
for us every year right up till the time he died. Yeah, and
Wow.
yeah, he was a real gentleman.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
Well, somewhere along the line, you met a woman that
yes.
became your wife.
Yes.
Tell us about your family.
Well, as a
little
matter of
bit.
fact, I was married twice. My first wife died after we'd been married for 25 years
Sorry.
from cancer. And May's husband, they weren't married as long as we were, and he passed away from cancer. And we met at the lake at the cottage, and this sort of thing. So one thing led to another, and so May and I got married, and we've been married now 32, 33 years now.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
congratulations.
yeah, thank
That
you.
Sounds like that worked out well.
Oh yeah, it really has, and she's been just the right kind of person for that job, because she played a big part in all my Army life, and or a good portion of my Army life, and certainly in our civilian endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a career of her own. She was a claims agent for Air Canada and Canadian National Railways.
Oh.
And as a matter of fact, she was the only woman claims agent west of Toronto. She did a darn good job, too. She did a good job. So we both retired at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
You can do some things,
Yeah.
travel a lot.
Yeah, we do a lot of traveling. We've been, we normally spend the winters. This is the first time in here. Normally we've been in either in South America or in Mexico, excuse me, or somewhere in Cayman Islands, well, Cayman Islands, we went to Spain and all kinds of places,
boy.
but
Wow.
we always try to get away in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So.
How do you go for the whole winter or just
Like 3 months, 2 or 3
3
months, yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
a nice time, a nice span of
Oh,
time
yeah.
to
Well, we
really
live in a
get
beautiful
acquainted with the culture.
Oh, yeah. And that's what we're here until April. And, you know, we live in a beautiful country up there, but in the wintertime, we're on the lake, and we get warm
Lake
air from the
effect,
lake and the cold air from above, and you get a lot of fog and stuff.
Mm.
So it's pretty dreary,
Yeah.
even though it doesn't get that cold, but it's dreary enough that you can't do anything. So
Yeah, well, I lived in Seattle for
Oh, sure,
years, and
yeah.
that's kind of the
Oh,
same
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah.
It's a lot of.
yeah,
It doesn't rain that much, but it's always cloudy.
That's
and,
right, yeah.
You know, it's
yeah.
cool.
You can't
but
work in
not
the garden.
Really
You
cold.
can't do
Yeah,
anything.
you
No.
just feel like staying inside.
Yeah, that's right.
So, did you have any children?
Yes, we have
Any-
three daughters. Two of them are on the coast. One's in Vancouver, one's in Abbotsford, and the other one's in Edmonton.
Mhm.
And their families are all grown up now, and now we have great grandchildren.
My goodness.
Yeah, and great grandchildren. Yeah, so yeah, and we for a number of years we try to have Christmas in July, and everybody come to our place because we live in the mountains.
Yeah.
Everybody likes to come there in the summertime.
Yeah, they didn't
And,
want to come to
But
Canada.
now
to
they've
visit
got
you.
youngsters, and now they're. As a matter of fact, two of the families are in Mexico right now, down in Cancun,
Mm.
for a week or two. So, yeah.
Yes. Well, sounds like a good life.
Yeah, oh yeah. I don't know what else I can. But anyway, it's being in the Army, you know, and or in any of the force, Army, Navy, or Air Force. You build up a great camaraderie with others, and it doesn't matter what outfit you're from. You get friends all over the world.
Yeah.
And I had three brothers, and all of them were in the. I had one in the Air Force. Two were in the Air Force, and then one was transferred to the Fleet Air Arm, and then my younger brother was in the Army,
And
so
they all came out of it okay?
yeah, all came out until after the war, and the one that was in the Fleet Air Arm, he became a test pilot,
Mm.
and was killed in a airplane accident in 1948.
Hmm. Which company did he work
He was representing the. He was working for the Air Force, or for the outfit, the Winter Experimental. It was called the Winter Experimental Unit. His commanding officer was an Air Force, but his buddy pilot was also a Navy, but there was an Air Force one as well, and they worked out of Edmonton and Watson Lake up in the Northwest Territories,
Okay, so,
where they did all the winter testing and so on. And he crashed flying a Sea Fury, which became the aircraft that they used on the carrier.
yeah.
When Canada had a fleet.
Mhm.
They don't have a carrier anymore. They went from the Warrior to the Magnificent. To the Bonaventure, and then they built a new one, the Maggie and the Magnificent, and then they found that they were spending, I think, something about 2/3 of their money on keeping a few airplanes in the air.
Yeah.
So they decided to do away with the Fleet Air Arm. So that was the end of that. Yeah.
Yeah, these new airplanes and ships are
Oh yeah.
expensive.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, we're going through a big argument at home right now. The government has okayed a purchase of 68 new fighter planes. They've gone in cahoots with the Americans and Brits, and who else? I think there's 4 of them involved in this new aircraft.
Oh, the F-35?
I guess that
The
is
Lockheed?
it. Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a big argument going on in our parliament right now
Mm.
because of the outlay of, I forget how many billions, 16. I
Yeah,
forget how many billions.
they're pricey.
Yeah, it's pricey as all get up. But anybody with any common sense tells you that it's the right thing to do right now. And they're talking about this outlay. Well, of course, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It takes years for this thing to be
spread out
produced.
over time.
And then on top of that, each country has got an opportunity to have so many different segments going for the building of it.
Mhm.
And then this is what I think a lot of people cannot see is
Yeah,
is-
it's, well, I worked at Lockheed for a while.
Oh, did you?
and,
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that, spread out over a number of countries.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
They all have their input
Sure.
in production to,
Yeah, right. So
bring
they
it
put
about.
people to
so,
work as well as
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Anyway, so
that,
that's the argument that'll be going on for the next few months, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I don't know what's going to happen in the U.S., but there may be that kind of arguments too, because they're saying, well, we're going to cut everything except the military.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
So I expect some people are going to say,
Oh,
wait a minute.
Oh, yeah, well, that's what we had to have happened back in those Trudeau years, and he decimated the armed forces, and it's taken us all this time to, we're in better shape now. We're in better shape now than Canada has ever been since the war, and with good equipment too.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I don't think people will let it slide back again. I hope not, anyway.
Well, what is the Canadian economy? Is that?
Oh, we're in good shape. We're in good shape.
Okay.
Dollar yesterday was over the American dollar yesterday.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. They've done fabulously well. That particular thing, though, doesn't help us, having our money more, because that makes our exports that much more expensive to ship out. But anyway, that's another story. But no, they've done a good job in the stimulus program that they put on. They put on a tremendous stimulus program to get industry and municipalities busy doing everything from building bridges and whatnot. And our economy is good. Our banking system is, they say, and not by just Canadians, an international thing. They say Canada has probably got the best monetary system going. So that part is good.
Maybe we need to send some people up there.
Well, that's one the thing I don't understand. Why countries don't cooperate more in things that work.
Yeah,
that
would be nice.
Yeah, why don't they get together when something is successful?
It's too much of the not built here thing.
We can do it in we can do it in wartime, and yet when it comes to peacetime, we
fall apart.
That's right. Yeah, it's a strange thing. But they've got a lot more people back to work. There's still a lot of people out of work. We're not over the hump yet, but we're in pretty good shape. Pretty good shape.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other?
Gee, I can't think. I'm sure I'll think of a dozen things afterwards.
Okay.
But anyway, I think I told you everything that I can think of right now.
Well, it sounds like you've really had an interesting life and a big impact on your country.
Yeah.
And I'd sure like to thank you for spending some time with us and for your service to Canada, I guess,
Well,
and
thank
to
you very
the
much.
help that they've given us
Yeah.
throughout history.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it being here, and I'm amazed at your museum. It's a beautiful. I haven't been into an aircraft museum like this anywhere.
Well, we try to keep it unique.
Yeah.
We're working to make it even better.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for having me.
Okay.
Okay.
And we'll shut this off. Okay.
Okay.
I gotta shut this one off. It's the checklist here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me stop this thing.